Arrogant billionaire calls the waitress too slow. Then she saves his $80 million deal. The entire restaurant went silent the moment Ethan Callaway looked at his Swiss watch and sighed in disappointment. 14 seconds, he muttered coldly, tapping the crystal face with one finger. Claire Bennett stood beside the table holding a silver coffee pot, her posture calm despite the weight of every eye suddenly turning toward her. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Manhattan Skyline restaurant, rain streaked across the glass like melted silver. Inside, the private dining room glowed with soft amber light, expensive whiskey, and the quiet arrogance of men who believed they controlled the world. Ethan leaned back slowly in his chair, perfectly tailored charcoal suit untouched by a single wrinkle. "People who move this slowly," he said without raising his voice, "don't belong near million-dollar decisions." A few men around the table laughed politely. One of the investors lowered his eyes into his wineglass to avoid the awkwardness. Claire didn't react. She simply poured the coffee carefully into Ethan's cup. Dark roast, no sugar, exactly the way he ordered it every Thursday night. Her hands remained steady, but her eyes shifted for half a second toward the open laptop sitting beside one of the foreign investors. Arabic text scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Ethan noticed her glance immediately. "Problem?" he asked sharply. Claire looked away. "No, sir." "Then maybe focus on the coffee instead of business conversations you wouldn't understand." Another quiet laugh moved around the table. Claire gave a small nod. "Of course." Then she stepped away, calm, silent, invisible again. That was how most people saw her at Callahan's Steakhouse. Just another waitress in a black uniform carrying trays beneath chandeliers worth more than her yearly income. Nobody noticed the way she memorized every customer's habits after one visit. Nobody noticed how she quietly corrected billing mistakes before managers caught them. Nobody noticed the worn economics textbook hidden inside her locker downstairs beside extra shoes and headache medicine for her double shifts. Ethan Callaway certainly didn't notice. At 38 years old, the billionaire founder of Callaway Capital had built an empire by demanding speed from everyone around him. Fast meetings, fast numbers, fast decisions. He hated hesitation almost as much as failure. And tonight mattered more than almost anything. The men sitting around that polished walnut table represented Al Nouri Holdings, a powerful investment group from Dubai preparing to finalize an $80 million hospitality acquisition with Ethan's company before midnight. One mistake could destroy 6 months of negotiations, which was exactly why Ethan's patience had completely disappeared by the time Claire arrived 14 seconds late with the coffee refill. Near the kitchen entrance, Claire placed the empty pot onto a stainless steel counter and exhaled slowly. Her coworker Madison leaned closer. "You okay?" Claire forced a small smile. "I'm fine." But she wasn't listening anymore, because through the half-open dining room doors, she heard something that made her stomach tighten instantly. One of the Arab investors had switched languages. The tone changed. Softer now. Faster. Intentional. Claire froze beside the counter as the man quietly spoke to his associate in fluent Arabic. "He still thinks the leverage clause stays unchanged after signing." Another man chuckled under his breath. "By tomorrow morning, his ownership percentage drops below controlling interest." Claire's fingers tightened around the edge of the steel counter. Her heartbeat slowed instead of rising. That was always how stress worked for her. Everything became quieter, sharper, more dangerous. Back inside the private dining room, Ethan lifted a crystal glass while confidently discussing expansion projections in Miami and Las Vegas. He had no idea the deal sitting in front of him was beginning to shift beneath his feet. And the only person in the entire restaurant who realized it was the waitress he had just called too slow. Claire did not move for several seconds after hearing the Arabic conversation near the private dining room. The sounds of plates clinking and low jazz music faded into the background, while the investors continued speaking behind the half-open doors, unaware anyone understood them. Once he signs tonight, the revised leverage percentage activates automatically. And he still believes the English draft is final. A soft laugh followed. Claire lowered her eyes toward the tray in her hands. The polished silver trembled slightly under the restaurant lights. Not from fear, from memory. Arabic had once filled lecture halls instead of private dining rooms. Financial terminology, diplomatic translation exercises, international market simulations projected across glowing screens at 2 in the morning while exhausted graduate students survived on vending machine coffee and ambition. That life felt very far away now. Claire. Madison's voice pulled her back. Table 12 needs another bottle of Cabernet. Claire blinked once. Right? She grabbed the wine bottle automatically, but her thoughts stayed fixed on the conversation she had overheard. Something was wrong with the contract. Very wrong. Upstairs, Ethan Callaway was preparing to sign away partial control of his own company without realizing it. And the worst part was how confident he looked doing it. Claire crossed the restaurant floor quietly. Her black shoes barely made a sound against the dark hardwood, while wealthy guests filled the dining room with conversations about stock prices, ski vacations, and Hampton's real estate. Nobody looked at the waitresses for more than a second. Especially not Claire. She preferred it that way. Invisible people heard everything. Near the far wall, a television above the bar flashed financial headlines from CNBC. Callaway capital expansion deal expected to close tonight. Analysts predict record hospitality growth across the Southeast. Claire stared at Ethan's photograph on the screen for half a second. Same cold gray eyes. Same controlled expression. Manhattan's business magazines loved him. Self-made billionaire. Ruthless negotiator. The man who once fired an executive during a 6-minute elevator ride because quarterly projections arrived late. Claire had read enough articles about Ethan Callaway to understand one thing clearly. Men like him rarely listened until losing something became personal. She reached table 12 and poured the wine carefully while the older couple thanked her warmly. Claire smiled politely, but her mind drifted again toward the private dining room, toward the contract, toward the sentence she could still hear repeating in her head. His ownership percentage drops below controlling interest. Her chest tightened slightly. Ethan had insulted her less than 10 minutes ago. Publicly, calmly, the kind of humiliation wealthy people delivered so casually they barely remembered it afterward. Most waitresses would have walked away and let him fail. Claire almost wished she could. But she had spent too many years studying ethics in negotiation rooms filled with ambitious men who treated honesty like weakness. Her father used to warn her about people like that before he died. The smartest person in the room is usually the quiet one listening. Back then, Claire Bennett had believed she would spend her life inside international boardrooms translating billion-dollar agreements between governments and corporations. Then came the hospital bills. Her father's sudden heart attack. Her mother's diagnosis 6 months later. Early onset dementia. Everything changed quietly after that. Tuition disappeared first. Then the apartment near campus. Then the future she had built so carefully one semester at a time. By 27, Claire spent her nights balancing trays instead of translating negotiations. During the day, she sat beside her mother in a small Queens apartment filled with sticky notes reminding her where the dishes were and what year it was. Sometimes her mother remembered Claire immediately. Sometimes she did not. The private dining room erupted into confident laughter again. Claire looked up instinctively. Through the glass wall, she saw Ethan reaching for a silver pen while lawyers organized paperwork around him. The investors smiled too easily now. Too comfortably. Claire felt it immediately. The timing had changed. They were close to making him sign. Very close. And for the first time all evening, the calm expression on her face slowly disappeared. Rain hammered softly against the glass walls of Callahan's Steakhouse, while Manhattan shimmered below like a city made of gold and electricity. Inside the private dining room, Ethan Callaway stood beside the table with one hand in his pocket and the other resting near the unsigned contract. Every movement he made carried precision. Calculated. Controlled. Even his silence felt expensive. "Gentlemen," Ethan said smoothly, "once this acquisition closes, we move immediately into Miami, Nashville, and Scottsdale before the fourth quarter. Timing is everything." The investors nodded with practiced smiles. Crystal glasses reflected warm light across the polished walnut table, while assistants typed notes and lawyers reorganized documents for the final review. Ethan watched them all with sharp gray eyes that missed almost nothing. Almost. You built this entire expansion in under 3 years? One investor asked. Ethan gave a small shrug. Speed creates advantage. Hesitation creates competition. The room murmured in agreement. Ethan had built his reputation on that philosophy. At 38, he had transformed Callaway Capital from a struggling private equity firm into one of the fastest-growing hospitality investment companies in the country. Hotels, luxury resorts, commercial properties. If Ethan wanted something, he acquired it before anyone else even realized it mattered. Employees feared him almost as much as competitors did. He once ended a $20 million partnership because a senior executive arrived 9 minutes late to a meeting in Chicago. Another time, he fired an analyst after discovering inaccurate projections hidden inside a presentation slide. Details matter, Ethan always said. Careless people are expensive, which was exactly why Claire Bennett irritated him the moment she walked into the room tonight. Not because of the coffee delay itself. 14 seconds meant nothing financially. But to Ethan, slowness represented weakness. Lack of urgency. Lack of discipline. He had spent years eliminating weakness from his company, his schedule, even his personal life. There was no room for distractions. No room for emotional thinking. Certainly no room for waitresses staring at negotiation documents they could not possibly understand. Ethan picked up the silver pen near the contract again, while one of the Dubai investors smiled politely across from him. Your vision is impressive, Mr. Callaway. Vision is useless without execution, Ethan replied instantly. That is where most people fail. His phone vibrated quietly against the table. 3 unread messages. Tokyo market updates. A delayed financing approval in Atlanta. Another executive asking for clarification about tomorrow morning's board call. Ethan ignored all of it. Tonight mattered more. $80 million. International expansion. Media attention. If this deal closed before midnight, Callaway Capital would dominate luxury hospitality headlines by sunrise. He could already picture the articles, the interviews, the investor confidence. Across the restaurant floor, Claire carried another tray toward the kitchen, while her mind raced faster with every passing minute. She watched Ethan through the glass wall again. Calm, confident, completely unaware. The worst negotiators were never the emotional ones. They were the overconfident ones. The people who believed control alone made them untouchable. Near the kitchen entrance, Madison leaned against the counter folding napkins. You are staring at that room like somebody died in there. Claire forced a faint smile. Just tired. Join the club. Madison laughed softly before lowering her voice. That billionaire guy is kind of terrifying, though. Claire glanced back toward Ethan. His expression never changed while speaking. Every sentence sounded final. He is used to people listening, Claire said quietly. Yeah, especially himself. Madison rolled her eyes and walked away. Claire remained still, because through the glass, she saw something that made her pulse slow instantly. One of the attorneys had just replaced the English contract packet with another version. Similar cover page, different tabs, different markings along the bottom edge. The Arabic investors exchanged quick glances. Small ones, barely visible. But Claire noticed. Her stomach tightened again. The leverage clause was not the only thing changing anymore. And Ethan Callaway was seconds away from signing papers he had not fully read. Claire stood motionless beside the service station while the private dining room blurred behind the glass. The replacement contract packet sat directly in front of Ethan now. Dark blue tabs instead of black. Slightly thicker pages. Small differences most people would never notice. But Claire had spent years training herself to notice details because details changed everything. Across the room, one of the Dubai investors leaned back comfortably in his chair, while another adjusted his cufflinks with slow confidence. They looked relaxed now. Too relaxed. The kind of calm people carried when they already knew the outcome. Ethan flipped through the pages once without fully reading them. Claire felt tension rise behind her ribs immediately. He was moving too fast. "You okay?" Madison asked again while stacking clean glasses nearby. Claire barely heard her. "Did they switch paperwork?" Madison blinked. "What?" Claire quickly shook her head. "Nothing." But it was not nothing. Her eyes locked on the Arabic investor nearest Ethan. Earlier, he had hidden his nervousness behind polished smiles and formal conversation. Now he looked almost amused. Claire knew that expression. Negotiators wore it when the trap had already closed. A server rushed past carrying steaks toward another section, while managers floated through the restaurant greeting wealthy guests with polished laughter. Nobody noticed the tension building inside the private dining room except Claire. Invisible people saw the things confidence ignored. Ethan signed preliminary initials on the bottom corner of one page without hesitation. One of the attorneys immediately slid another document forward. Claire's pulse slowed again. That familiar cold focus settled over her thoughts. She hated that feeling because it reminded her too much of the person she used to be. Graduate seminars. Simulated negotiations. Endless nights inside Columbia University conference labs where professors deliberately hid manipulative clauses inside multilingual contracts just to test who would catch them first. Most students failed because they focused on translation instead of intent. Claire had been one of the few who understood that language itself was never the real weapon. Timing was, pressure was, ego was. Ethan Callaway was being manipulated by all three. Claire. The sharp voice startled her. Restaurant manager Richard stood beside the service station adjusting his tie impatiently. "Table 7 has been waiting for sparkling water for 6 minutes. Sorry." Claire reached automatically for a tray. Richard lowered his voice. "And stay away from the Callaway room unless they ask for something directly. Those people are closing an enormous deal tonight." Claire glanced toward the glass walls again. "I know." Richard followed her eyes and sighed. "Look, I heard what happened earlier. Ethan Callaway humiliates everybody. Do not take it personally." Claire gave a faint nod. "I am not." But she was thinking about something else entirely now. If Ethan signed those revised papers, Callaway Capital could lose majority leverage control within 18 months. Maybe sooner. The hidden clause depended on debt restructuring percentages buried inside the Arabic revisions. Most American attorneys would not catch it immediately because technically the wording remained legal. Just deceptive. Claire grabbed the sparkling water bottle and moved toward table 7. But her attention stayed fixed on the private room. Through the glass, she saw Ethan remove his watch briefly and place it beside the contract while speaking firmly to the investors. Even from across the restaurant, his confidence filled the room. He still believed he controlled the negotiation. Then Claire saw the final detail that made her stop walking completely. One of the investors quietly turned a single page backward before sliding the document closer to Ethan. Not forward, backward. A distraction technique. Forced the signature before full review. Claire's breath caught softly. They were rushing him now. Deliberately. Her fingers tightened around the cold glass bottle in her hand while rain rolled down the restaurant windows like liquid silver. She could walk away. She probably should. Ethan had insulted her publicly less than 30 minutes ago. Men like him rarely thanked people beneath them. But another memory surfaced instead. Her father sitting at their kitchen table years ago, circling mistakes inside old newspaper editorials with a red pen while Claire studied beside him. "Integrity matters most," he used to tell her quietly, "especially when nobody would blame you for staying silent." Inside the private dining room, Ethan uncapped the silver signing pen. Claire stared at the glass walls for one long second. Then she started walking toward the door. The private dining room quieted slightly as Claire pushed open the glass door with one careful hand. Warm light spilled across the polished floor while every conversation at the table paused for half a second. Ethan looked up immediately. His expression hardened the moment he saw her. "We did not order anything," he said flatly. Claire stepped inside anyway, holding the sparkling water bottle against her tray. "I know, sir." One of the attorneys frowned impatiently. "We are in the middle of final signatures." Claire nodded once. It will only take a moment. Ethan leaned back slowly in his chair. The silver pen remained between his fingers. This better not be another delay. His tone carried the same cold edge from earlier, but Claire noticed something different now. Fatigue, the kind hidden beneath control. He had probably been negotiating since sunrise. "Sir," Claire said carefully, "I think you should review the leverage clause again before signing." Silence. Complete silence. One of the investors exchanged a quick glance with another across the table. Ethan's eyes narrowed immediately. "Excuse me?" Claire kept her voice calm. "There are differences between the English draft and the Arabic revisions." The room froze. One attorney gave a short laugh of disbelief. "And you know this because?" Ethan stared directly at Claire now, irritation spreading slowly across his face. "You are a waitress." Claire did not look away. "Yes, sir." "Then maybe focus on serving dinner instead of interrupting negotiations you do not understand." A few uncomfortable smiles appeared around the table. One of the younger assistants lowered his eyes toward his laptop screen. Claire felt heat rise in her chest, but her expression stayed composed. Quiet people learned long ago that emotion only made arrogant men feel stronger. "I understand enough to know the wording changed," she said softly. Ethan stood up slowly from his chair. Tall, controlled, dangerous without ever raising his voice. "Do you have any idea how much this meeting is worth?" Claire glanced briefly toward the contract. "Around $80 million. That caught him off guard for half a second. Tiny, barely visible, but she saw it. Ethan stepped closer. "And yet somehow you believe the legal teams from New York and Dubai missed something that a restaurant server magically noticed while pouring coffee?" Claire lowered the tray onto the side counter carefully before answering. "No, sir. I believe they noticed exactly what they were supposed to notice." The room went still again. One of the Dubai investors shifted in his chair. Another adjusted his tie too quickly. Ethan caught the movement instantly, but his attention returned to Claire just as fast. "What exactly are you accusing them of?" Claire shook her head. "I am not accusing anyone." Her voice remained quiet, steady. "I am asking you to read page 47 again." Slowly. Ethan almost laughed. "Almost. You interrupted an international negotiation to tell me to read more slowly?" Claire met his eyes calmly. "Sometimes speed is expensive." The words landed harder than she expected. Several people around the table suddenly looked very interested in their paperwork. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. Outside the glass walls, thunder rolled softly across Manhattan, while rain blurred the city lights into silver streaks. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then one of the investors smiled politely toward Ethan. "Perhaps we continue, Mr. Calloway. We are all tired." Ethan did not answer immediately. His eyes stayed locked on Claire. She could feel the room waiting for him to dismiss her. Fire her maybe. Managers across the restaurant were already watching nervously through the glass. But then Ethan slowly picked up the contract again. "Page 47, he repeated coldly. Claire gave a small nod. Ethan flipped through the packet with controlled impatience while the room held its breath. Then suddenly his hand stopped moving. Just for a second. Claire saw it immediately. The smallest pause. Tiny changes in expression most people would never notice. But she noticed everything. Ethan read the paragraph again. Slower this time. And for the first time all night, the confidence in his face began to crack. Ethan's thumb remained pressed against page 47, while the silence inside the room thickened like fog. The confidence in his posture did not disappear completely, but something underneath it shifted. Claire watched his eyes move across the paragraph again. Slower now. Careful. The way experienced negotiators read when instinct finally overrides ego. One of the attorneys cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Calloway, that section only references future restructuring contingencies." Ethan did not look up. "No," he said quietly. "It does not." The room froze. Claire could almost hear the air conditioning humming beneath the silence. Ethan's eyes narrowed at the text. Then he flipped backward 2 pages. Forward again. Cross-checking references. percentages, timelines. His expression hardened with every second. Interesting, he murmured. Across the table, one of the Dubai investors leaned forward with a polite smile that looked increasingly forced. Perhaps there is confusion in translation. Claire spoke before Ethan could answer. There is no confusion. Every eye turned toward her again. She stepped closer to the table, calm despite the tension pressing through the room. The English version references temporary dilution under debt restructuring conditions. The Arabic revision changes the dilution threshold permanently after 18 months if expansion revenue targets are missed. One of the attorneys blinked rapidly. That is not possible. Claire looked directly at the contract. Page 47 references subsection 12. But subsection 12 was revised on page 32. Ethan flipped instantly to the earlier section. His jaw tightened. The attorney beside him grabbed another copy, scanning the lines with growing panic. Claire continued quietly. The wording sounds almost identical unless you understand the financial context behind the Arabic phrasing. The youngest investor shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Another removed his glasses slowly. Ethan looked up at the lead negotiator across the table. His voice remained controlled, but colder than before. You attempted to bury permanent leverage transfer inside a translation revision. The man smiled tightly. Business negotiations often involve nuanced interpretation. Ethan closed the contract with one sharp motion. The sound echoed through the room. Not when $80 million is involved. Nobody moved. Nobody even touched their drinks. Outside the glass walls, lightning flickered somewhere above the skyline, while rain hammered softly against Manhattan's towers. Claire stood near the edge of the table with her hands resting calmly at her sides. Still wearing the same black waitress uniform. Still looking invisible. Yet suddenly every person in that room was staring at her like they had never truly seen her before. Ethan's senior attorney looked pale now. We completely missed the cross-reference adjustment. Claire gave a small nod. Because the revisions were designed to look routine. Ethan slowly leaned back in his chair. His gray eyes moved toward Claire again. Different this time. No arrogance now. No irritation. Just sharp disbelief. You read all of that from one glance? Claire shook her head lightly. Not all of it. Then how? For a second, the room felt smaller. Quieter. Claire glanced briefly toward the rain-covered windows before answering. The investor on your left kept turning the pages backward every time ownership percentages came up. The room went silent again. Ethan slowly looked toward the investor she mentioned. The man said nothing. Claire continued softly. People protect the pages they are afraid someone will read carefully. One of the attorneys actually laughed once under his breath. Not from humor. From shock. Ethan stared at Claire for a long moment without speaking. Then he looked back down at the contract and removed the silver signing pen completely. This meeting is over, he said coldly. The lead negotiator straightened immediately. Mr. Calloway, surely we can revise. No, Ethan's voice never rose. Somehow that made it heavier. You tried to manipulate ownership transfer through language discrepancies during final execution. He slid the contract across the table untouched. We are done here. Chairs moved slowly across the floor as the investors gathered their papers in tense silence. Nobody looked at Claire while leaving the room, but Ethan did. Constantly. As the glass doors finally closed behind the last attorney, the private dining room became silent except for rain and distant jazz music from the restaurant floor outside. Ethan remained standing beside the table while Claire quietly reached for the untouched coffee cups. Claire. His voice stopped her instantly. She turned slowly toward him. Ethan looked at her differently now, like a man trying to solve a puzzle he had completely misunderstood. Claire slowly lifted the untouched coffee cups from the table, while the silence inside the private dining room settled into something heavier than tension. Rain continued sliding down the glass walls in soft silver streaks, blurring the lights of Manhattan beyond them. Ethan Calloway had not moved. His expensive suit jacket remained perfectly pressed despite the collapse of an $80 million negotiation only minutes earlier. But his expression had changed completely. He no longer looked like a man in control of the room. He looked like a man replaying every detail he missed. Claire. Her name sounded unfamiliar in his voice now. Careful. Measured. She turned toward him calmly. Yes, sir? Ethan glanced briefly at the contract still lying open on the table. Where did you learn Arabic finance law? Claire lowered her eyes toward the coffee tray. College. That answer explains almost nothing. She gave a faint smile. Most answers do not. Ethan stared at her for a second longer than necessary. Then he pulled out one of the empty chairs and sat down slowly, loosening his tie for the first time all evening. The movement felt strangely human compared to the rigid control he carried earlier. You embarrassed 3 international attorneys tonight, he said quietly. Claire adjusted the coffee cups carefully onto the tray. That was not my intention. No? Ethan leaned back slightly. Then what exactly was your intention? Claire paused before answering. To stop you from signing something dangerous. The honesty of the response seemed to catch him off guard more than anything else had. Most people around Ethan Callaway chose their words carefully. Employees softened criticism. Investors exaggerated confidence. Assistants avoided disagreement entirely. Claire did none of those things. Ethan studied her again. The plain black waitress uniform. The simple ponytail. The exhaustion hidden beneath calm eyes. Nothing about her appearance matched the woman who had just dismantled a multimillion-dollar manipulation strategy in under 5 minutes. You said they designed the revisions to look routine, Ethan said slowly. How would you even recognize something like that? Claire remained quiet for a moment. Somewhere outside the room, dishes clinked softly and distant laughter drifted through the restaurant. Normal life continuing while something irreversible shifted quietly inside this room. Finally, she answered, because I used to study negotiation strategy. Ethan frowned slightly. Used to? Claire nodded once. Columbia University. International Finance and Diplomatic Language Mediation. Ethan blinked. Actually blinked. You studied at Columbia? For 3 years. 3. His voice sharpened with confusion. Then why are you working here? Claire looked toward the rain-covered windows instead of answering immediately. Life changed. Ethan waited. She did not continue. That silence frustrated him more than most arguments would have. You walked away from Columbia to become a waitress? Claire finally met his eyes again. Calm. Direct. I walked away because my father died unexpectedly, and my mother stopped remembering where she lived. The room fell completely still. Ethan said nothing. Claire continued quietly while lifting another cup from the table. Someone had to pay the hospital bills. Ethan watched her carefully now, noticing things he had ignored before. The slight tiredness beneath her eyes. The faded mark where a watch once sat on her wrist. The composure that did not come from confidence, but from surviving difficult years without complaining about them. And you just... Ethan searched for the words. Stayed here. Claire shrugged lightly. Queens is cheaper than Manhattan. Night shifts leave time for doctor appointments during the day. Ethan leaned forward slowly, elbows resting against the table. You are telling me a Columbia negotiation specialist has been serving steaks in this restaurant while executives like me walk past you every day without noticing? Claire gave a faint smile that carried no bitterness at all. Somehow that made it worse. People usually see what they expect to see. The sentence hit Ethan harder than she realized, because suddenly he remembered every dismissive word he had spoken earlier that night. Too slow. Stay in your lane. Focus on serving dinner. He had reduced her to a uniform before she even opened her mouth. Ethan looked down at the untouched contract again, then back at Claire standing quietly beside the table holding empty coffee cups like the entire evening had not just changed the course of his company. For the first time in years, Ethan Callaway felt something deeply unfamiliar settling uncomfortably in his chest. Shame. By the time Claire finished her shift, Manhattan had turned almost completely silver beneath the rain. The dinner crowd was gone now. Chairs rested upside down on empty tables while exhausted staff wiped counters and counted receipts beneath dimmed lights. Somewhere near the kitchen, Madison laughed quietly at something a bartender said, but the sound felt far away. Claire tied her coat slowly beside the employee lockers, her body heavy from 14 straight hours on her feet. Her phone buzzed once inside her pocket. A reminder from the pharmacy about her mother's prescription refill due tomorrow morning. Claire closed her eyes briefly before slipping the phone away again. Numbers, bills, schedules. Her life had become an endless series of practical calculations. She grabbed her worn umbrella and stepped outside into the cold drizzle coating the Manhattan sidewalks. Taxi lights reflected across puddles like broken gold ribbons, while crowds rushed past beneath umbrellas and glowing storefront signs. Nobody noticed Claire Bennett walking quietly toward the subway entrance with tired shoulders and rain collecting along the edge of her coat. Just another invisible woman heading home after work. Claire. She stopped instantly. Ethan Calloway stood several feet away near the curb beneath the soft glow of a street lamp. No assistance. No security. No polished conference room. Just Ethan in a dark overcoat with rain touching his hair for the first time all evening. Claire looked genuinely surprised. Ethan seemed uncomfortable with that reaction. "You waited out here?" she asked quietly. He glanced briefly toward the restaurant behind them. "I was not sure if you would leave through the front or back." Claire almost smiled at the awkwardness hidden beneath the sentence. Billionaires usually sounded certain about everything. Ethan held a slim dark folder in one hand, but he did not offer it immediately. For a second, neither of them spoke. Traffic hissed through wet streets nearby while steam rose from subway grates into the cold night air. Finally, Ethan exhaled slowly. "I owe you an apology." Claire looked at him calmly. "You do not owe me anything." "Yes," Ethan said immediately. "I do." His voice stayed low, but there was no arrogance left inside it now. "I spoke to you like you were incapable of understanding the room simply because of your uniform." Claire lowered her eyes briefly toward the rain-covered sidewalk. Ethan continued before she could answer. "And the truth is, you were the only person in that room actually paying attention." The city noise softened around them. Claire studied him carefully now. The expensive watch was gone from his wrist. His tie loosened slightly. He looked less like the cold billionaire from earlier and more like a man exhausted by the realization that intelligence does not always arrive wearing a suit. Ethan held out the folder quietly. "What is this?" Claire asked. "Open it." She hesitated before taking it from his hands. Inside sat several documents neatly organized beneath a single business card. Claire's eyes moved across the pages slowly. Medical billing statements, insurance balances, prescription costs. Her expression changed instantly. She looked back up at him sharply. "How did you get these?" Ethan answered honestly. "After you left the dining room, I asked one of my analysts to look into your background." Claire's face hardened slightly at that. Ethan noticed immediately. "I know," he said quietly. "That was invasive. I should have asked first." Rain tapped softly against the folder between them. Ethan glanced toward the papers again. "Your mother's treatment expenses are now fully covered." Claire froze. "What?" "The balances were paid an hour ago." Her fingers tightened around the folder. "Why would you do that?" Ethan looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Because tonight you saved me from making an $80 million mistake." Claire shook her head softly. "That is not the same thing." "No," Ethan admitted quietly. "It is not." He paused. "You did not save my deal, Claire." Rain rolled slowly down the side of the street lamp beside them while Manhattan moved endlessly in the background. Ethan's next words came softer than anything she had heard from him all night. "You saved me from becoming the kind of man who stops listening to people simply because they look ordinary." Claire stared at him silently while the city lights reflected in rainwater between them. Then, for the first time that night, Ethan Calloway looked away first. 3 weeks later, the rain was gone from Manhattan. But Ethan Calloway still could not stop thinking about the waitress who had quietly dismantled an $80 million trap while everyone else in the room failed to notice it. The story had spread through financial circles faster than he expected. Lawyers blamed translation discrepancies. Investors blamed procedural confusion. Ethan blamed himself, because deep down he knew the truth was simpler than that. He had stopped listening the moment he believed power made him the smartest person in every room. And Claire Bennett had exposed that weakness without ever raising her voice. Inside the 72nd floor headquarters of Callaway Capital, executives moved quickly through glass hallways carrying tablets and reports beneath giant digital market screens. Phones rang constantly. Coffee machines hissed. Conversations about acquisitions and projections echoed across conference rooms lined with steel and marble. Everything inside the building moved fast, exactly the way Ethan once preferred it. But lately, people had started noticing changes. Meetings lasted longer now because Ethan actually listened instead of interrupting. Junior analysts suddenly found themselves being asked questions instead of dismissed. Last Tuesday, an assistant accidentally spilled coffee across printed reports before a board meeting and nearly burst into tears expecting to be fired. Ethan simply handed her a clean towel and calmly asked for another copy. Nobody knew what caused the shift, except Ethan did. His office doors opened quietly as his senior advisor stepped inside holding a stack of contracts. "The revised Dubai proposal arrived this morning," she said carefully. Ethan looked up from his desk. "And this version is legitimate." Ethan nodded once but did not immediately reach for the paperwork. Instead, his eyes drifted toward the corner of his office where a plain white coffee cup sat beside the window. Not expensive, not designer, just simple ceramic from a small diner in Manhattan. "Sir?" the advisor asked again. Ethan blinked slightly. "Leave it there. I will review it later." She hesitated before speaking carefully. "You have another applicant waiting downstairs." Ethan frowned faintly. "For what?" "The strategic analyst position." Something almost like amusement crossed Ethan's face. For the past 2 weeks, his company had interviewed dozens of Ivy League graduates for the new position he created immediately after that night at the restaurant. Perfect resumes, perfect recommendations, perfect confidence. None of them impressed him. "Send them home," Ethan said quietly. The advisor blinked in surprise. "All of them." Ethan stood slowly and walked toward the office window overlooking Manhattan. Far below, thousands of people moved through the city unseen by each other. Ordinary faces, ordinary clothes, ordinary lives. Ethan remembered how easily he once dismissed people like that. "Yes," he answered softly. "I already found the person I want." Later that evening, Callahan's steakhouse glowed warm beneath soft golden lights, while jazz music drifted quietly through the dining room. Claire balanced a tray carefully across her shoulder, while customers filled the restaurant with conversations and laughter. Nothing about her looked different from before. Same black uniform, same calm expression, same quiet efficiency. But tonight, people noticed her more. Richard no longer assigned her to hidden sections in the back. Madison asked her opinion about everything now. Even the chefs greeted her with sudden respect when she passed the kitchen. Claire never seemed comfortable with any of it. Near the entrance, the door opened softly. Ethan Callaway stepped inside alone again. Several employees immediately straightened nervously, but Ethan barely noticed them. His attention found Claire almost instantly across the room. She looked up from her tray and paused. Neither smiled right away. Somehow that made the moment feel more honest. Ethan walked toward her slowly. No arrogance this time. No performance. Just a man learning how to approach another human being without status standing in front of him like armor. Claire stopped beside table 14 while Ethan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "What is this?" she asked quietly. "A job offer." Claire blinked once. Ethan continued before she could answer. "Strategic analyst. Flexible hours. Remote work whenever necessary." His voice softened slightly. "Enough time to stay with your mother." Claire stared at the envelope without taking it yet. "Why me?" Ethan looked directly at her. "Because intelligence means nothing if nobody has the courage to use it." The restaurant noise faded softly around them while warm light reflected against the windows. Claire finally accepted the envelope carefully between her fingers. Ethan watched her for a long moment before speaking again. "You know," he said quietly, "for someone I once called too slow." Claire raised an eyebrow slightly. Ethan almost smiled. "You changed everything faster than anyone I have ever met." Claire looked down at the envelope in her hands, then back at him. Calm, quiet, unshaken. The same woman everyone overlooked for years. Outside, Manhattan roared endlessly beneath the night sky. But inside the restaurant, for one brief moment, everything felt still. Because sometimes the people the world notices first are not the ones who matter most. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one holding the truth everyone else is too distracted to see.